If you've seen any of my work the last few years, you know I like to draw heads. And if you've spoken to me about my drawing, you know that my goal is to draw one head per day. Why I do this is to prove myself that a day when I make a character first thing in the morning is to spend the rest of the day knowing I took full advantage of my creative time. I've bathed in what's possible instead of what's impossible. Once a teacher, always a teacher. COVID changed me. COVID changed my habits, changed what I learned to expect from a day. COVID was the reset button I needed but didn't know I needed. When the world stopped in its tracks on March 13th, 2020, not only did I have to describe to a room full of students what this societal closure would look like, I had to frame this new situation in a way that was accurate and acceptable. The announcement came during my 6th period class. School was closed indefinitely. Every 80s kid's dream come true. So it's like a vacation? Yes, but you can't go anywhere. Can I go camping? I think you can go camping. When I got home that day, I went for a run. It felt odd, freeing and confiding at the same time. The streets were empty. I was running down empty sidewalks. The world just stopped. But before I could find myself again, before I managed to cut alcohol out of my life, before I could do anything, I had to let go of what happened. The past back then held a particular glow of nostalgia for me. There was a lot of good memories from the past, but present times that were memorable were less prevalent. We were in the middle of a remodel, quarantining in our basement. We had healthcare, we had jobs, but more and more people were dying every day. I could see the space in me that I needed to grow into, but I wasn't there yet. I needed a new way to be, to walk in this world. I started with images, a blank page, colored pencils, a color blender to blur, tones to colors, hues to shadow. I got to know the weight of lines, the weight of ink, the measure in millimeters of just how small and thin the lines I would make would be. The smaller the better. Could I learn to draw a line that is invisible but supports a face, neck, and head? Could I draw the things I'm afraid of? Could drawing take care of me in ways that writing never did? I was bucking the system of life and going for my own happiness. What holds more promise than a blank page waiting to be filled with lines and blobs that can become art? Anything is possible in this blank state. It is not success or a failure or not quite ready yet. In the nanosecond of now, it is a blank page, but it is also a promise of what can happen if my mood is right and gravity feels like it owes me a solid. My characters, my creatures felt like the things that I couldn't admit to, cop to, or weren't aware that I was feeling these things. And as the world slowed down and the death count went up, I went inward. I taught myself guitar chords. I created a photo book about running in alleyways. Then I switched my focus to illustration. Drawing is an act of love for someone who wasn't used to giving himself too much credit. When I cut alcohol out of my life in January of 2021, I had already been drawing for a few years. But it was my new sobriety that drawing became the kind of thing I did for choice on almost any night of the week. The worse the pandemic got, teaching-wise, parenting-wise, the more I drew. Some nights it was all I knew how to do. I was learning something new. I took an empty page and made something that wasn't there before. Words came to me also. I heard these characters speak to me. They were my thoughts played through someone else. Oh, how to describe the feeling of trying something new and having you be pleased with the results. Sometimes it's an accident and sometimes it's intentional. In the beginning, I struggled to accept my work. Sometimes my drawings felt so childish or primitive, but the more I worked on them, the more I felt these people were as much of a part of me as anyone in my family, or maybe one of my students. But with the world on fire and everything on my life as teacher and educator so alienating, on-camera teaching 26 squares in a Google Meet window, and in this new world where in-person human connection was no longer possible, I found that drawing was a way to send my students my regard for them. Is the world grinding to a halt? Here's a picture of what Mr. Strong would look like if he had a conjoined twin. Thousands of people dying getting you down? Maybe you'll cheer up when we draw monsters of our feelings. Yes, we've never been further apart as a society. Yes, my daughter's mental health was becoming more and more of a challenge every night until the situation exploded and she went away and I got worse. Until January 1st came around and I got tired of pretending I could control things. I had a long, hard conversation with my wife and decided to cut alcohol out of my life. So when January 2021 came around, I was ready to live a new life on the page, the illustrated one. As bad things kept happening in the world, I returned to the page to grow my drawing practice. In my classes, I was the pep talker, the lone voice in a sea of turned off cameras and unanswered student chats. How is everyone doing? Blank. What are your favorite foods to eat? Silence. Occasionally, I'd get a glimpse of a student's home life. The camera would turn on for a second, then flash away. A mistake button hit. One time I saw a kid in a basement with the walls covered black and they were covered in silver graffiti. One time I saw a kid in a basement where the walls were black and covered in silver graffiti. I saw lots of LED lights and stuffies, then weeks of blank screens. Some days I would show up to hold class and there would be no one there, even if the class showed that there were a dozen or so students on screen. Often I had to wait about 20 minutes to get a student who would actually talk to me. They would speak, but all the other voices were empty. I figured out that the students figured out that if they logged into class early, they were ghosts that had logged into a computer in one room, then left the room with their login still active. Then they could wander to a different part of the house to most likely play video games. It's what I would have done. Now that we were fully disconnected, I saw all the ways in which I had pushed people away before. I lived in a different headspace in order to be safe. Being alone wasn't just something I experienced. I felt it with all the cuts that accompanied it. I was broken, I was hurting, the world was on fire. The world was disconnected by a technology that was supposed to bring us closer together. So I went inward. I had my first dry summer of 2021 immersed in my sketch pad, watercolor brush pens, 4A and 4B sketch pencils. The fainter the lead pencil, the easier my time out of making sense out of what I saw. I studied hash marks, cross-hatching, inking with different inks. I started trying to make a graphic novel based on a book I'd written about two teenage boys falling in love, based on my own experience of having a friend who was obsessed with me when I was in grade school. I turned that real-life traumatic era into a tale of youthful discovery. But that didn't feel like me because I was still figuring that out. I wanted to step forward and do things the way I was always meant to do them. But each time I did, I scolded myself for even trying, knowing all the while that my grandmother was an art teacher for 2 decades. I had been an art teacher for almost 2 decades. My title said digital arts teacher, but for years I was more of a photo and video teacher. But I saw this space in my life open up for something new, and that something new was illustration. That I could translate an idea into my head, take the theoretical and make it visual and do it on my own with just pen and ink was some sort of sublime miracle. My feelings just didn't have to live inside of me, but could be transposed out of me and onto the page. I drew faces with monstrous expressions. All the follow I felt inside made it into my images. I used to teach a lesson in photography called Lead by Emotion, where the student would state their intention to themselves as far as what art they wanted to make. And they would center themselves around that intention. I'd have them clear their mind and head in the direction of the pain of that idea, have them make all their artistic decisions based on that pain. And somehow, that original feeling or thought or intention comes through in the final image. What a thrill it was finding photography years ago. When I picked up a camera for the first time in college, black and white photography meant that I could play philosophy. I could make it come to life. A building wasn't just a building, it could be a face. A reflection of a building is a self-portrait. Is capitalism laughing at itself? With photography, I could play with ideas like they were pawns on a chessboard. A dude reading a porno juxtaposed with the golden tips of the catechism at a Catholic church to make a comment on the compartmentalization of man and sin. The bright colors of the stained glass and the bright reds of medieval battlefields. God and morality, labor and battle. All I needed were symbols, and I could set them next to each other, decorate ideas like race cars and make them race each other, like speech and debate with objects that knew how to shut up. Big ideas like war and labor, represented by a shovel and an army helmet I found in the backyard. I made up this ideal person of who I was supposed to be: teacher and thinker, raconteur and writer, athlete, runner, liver of life to the fullest. This was the thing I wanted to be: everyone and no one, those two forces rubbed up against each other. Add the daughter's mental health to the picture, and well, it all kind of blew up. And with the help of illustration, I helped to put my world back together, turn over my skin. Like if skin were dirt, I'd spend the time away from the world rerouting the roots, rewiring the wires like veins, the arteries and ventricles that go all the way to the center of my chest.